Welcome back to Hollywood Quest. Today we'll delve into a story not of glamour and love, but of terror, isolation, and a kind of cruelty so profound it borders on the unbelievable. This is the story of Christina Crawford, the girl who was born into a legend and survived a nightmare. It is a story that would not just tarnish an icon, but would force an entire culture to confront the monsters that can hide in plain sight, even in the most beautiful of homes. To truly grasp the world Christina Crawford was born into, you have to understand the Hollywood of the 1930s and 40s. It wasn't merely an industry, it was a feudal system. The major studios were kingdoms, and the stars were their most valuable assets. Their lives weren't their own. Their images were meticulously crafted, managed, and fiercely protected by studio public relations departments that operated with the efficiency of intelligence agencies. A star's persona was a product, sold to the American public as an aspirational dream, and Joan Crawford was the ultimate product of this system. Joan Crawford was born Lucille Fay LeSueur in San Antonio, Texas. Her early life was one of grim poverty and instability. She was a woman who literally danced her way out of destitution, a Charleston champion who arrived in Hollywood with nothing but a suitcase and a ferocious, all-consuming ambition. She understood, perhaps better than anyone, that in this town, perception was reality. She changed her name, her face, her voice. She willed herself into being Joan Crawford, a creature of pure cinematic power. By 1939, when Christina entered her life, Joan was at a critical juncture. She had been a top star for over a decade, but the flapper roles were long gone. She was navigating the treacherous waters of middle age in an industry that worshipped youth. A string of failed high-profile marriages had left her single. In this context, motherhood was not just a personal desire, it was a strategic career move. In an era when powerful women were often painted as cold and masculine, adopting a child was the perfect way to soften her image, to project a maternal warmth that was both publicly appealing and deeply sympathetic. Christina was born in Hollywood on June 11, 1939. Her birth father was married to another woman, and her young unmarried mother knew she couldn't raise a child alone. The adoption was not handled through conventional state-run agencies. Such institutions would have almost certainly rejected a single divorced full-time working actress. Instead, Joan utilized the services of a baby broker, a common practice in the era for those with wealth and influence. From the very moment of her adoption, Christina's existence was intertwined with the machinery of Hollywood publicity. The fan magazines, the primary source of celebrity news for most Americans, were filled with saccharine stories of Joan's maternal devotion. "My children are the most important thing in my life," she would declare in interviews. "I'm a mother first, an actress second." And the world, captivated by the glamour and the drama of it all, ate it up. They saw the beautiful movie star and her adoring daughter, a living, breathing testament to the idea that Joan Crawford could, in fact, have it all. But the house at 426 North Bristol Avenue in Brentwood, the sprawling mansion that served as the backdrop for this perfect family portrait, held secrets that were far darker than any film noir plot. Behind the manicured hedges and the locked gates, a very different story was unfolding, one that would remain buried for decades under a mountain of fear, power, and carefully managed lies. The Brentwood mansion was less a home and more a museum, a shrine to its owner's fame, and a prison for its youngest inhabitants. Christina's earliest memories are steeped in a pervasive sense of anxiety, a need to be perpetually perfect in an environment where the slightest imperfection could trigger a cataclysm. Joan's well-known perfectionism, which the press lauded as professional dedication, took on a terrifying form within the walls of her home. It was an obsession, a pathology that governed every aspect of daily life. The floors were polished to a mirror-like sheen, so slippery that a child could hardly run or play without risk of falling. The furniture, exquisite and expensive, was shrouded in custom-made plastic covers, rendering it cold and untouchable. It was a space designed for aesthetics, not for comfort, for photographs, not for family. This obsession with control extended most dangerously to her children. Christina, and later her adopted brother Christopher, were not allowed to be messy, spontaneous children. They were expected to be miniature adults, always clean, always polite, always perfect. Any deviation from this impossible standard was met with a rage that Christina would later describe as volcanic. The most infamous story, the one that has become a chilling piece of pop culture lexicon, is, of course, the wire hanger incident. The story, as Christina has told it countless times, is terrifying in its specifics. She had expensive dresses, a closet full of them, but one hung on a common wire hanger from a dry cleaner. In the dead of night, Joan discovered this infraction. She stormed into Christina's room, ripped her from her bed, and dragged her into the closet. In a frenzy of screaming, "No wire hangers! No wire hangers! Ever!" She beat the young child with the metal hanger until her own hands grew tired, then proceeded to tear the closet apart, throwing the expensive clothes onto the floor in a heap. This incident, seared into public memory by the book and the subsequent film, was not an isolated loss of temper. It was emblematic of a consistent and brutal pattern. Joan's parenting was a regimen of psychological and physical torment, often unfolding in the dead of night. She was a notorious insomniac and frequently drank heavily. It was during these late-night hours, when the world was asleep and her defenses were down, that her darkest impulses would emerge. She would stage what the children called night raids. Without warning, she would burst into their rooms, flicking on the lights and screaming about some perceived mess. She would pull the sheets off their beds, dump their toy chests and dresser drawers onto the floor, and force the small children to scrub the floors and bathrooms with harsh chemicals until sunrise. The alleged crime was never commensurate with the punishment. A fingerprint on a wall, a toy left out of place, could trigger an all-night ordeal of hard labor and verbal abuse. Food, the most fundamental symbol of nurturing, was transformed into an instrument of torture. Christina recounts being forced to sit at the dinner table for hours, sometimes late into the night, until she finished every last bite of a meal she found disgusting. To punish Christina for some minor transgression, Joan served her a large, bloody, rare filet mignon. Christina, who shared her mother's aversion, refused to eat it. The plate was taken away, only to reappear at the next meal, and the next, cold and congealed. This silent, agonizing battle of wills continued for more than 2 days, a drawn-out exercise in psychological dominance that a small child had no hope of winning. The abuse, however, was not always so overt. Some of Joan's cruelest acts were subtle, designed to chip away at Christina's spirit and sense of self. Joan was pathologically competitive, even with her own daughter. As Christina blossomed from a pretty child into a beautiful young woman, Joan's jealousy became a palpable, poisonous force in the house. There's a chilling and often overlooked incident that perfectly illustrates this. When Christina was 16, she landed a small role on a popular television soap opera, The Secret Storm. It was a moment of personal triumph, a step out of her mother's enormous shadow. After filming an episode, she returned home tired but exhilarated. She found her mother waiting for her, her face a mask of cold fury. Joan had watched the broadcast. Instead of praise or encouragement, She delivered a withering, cruel critique of Christina's performance, but her jealousy demanded a more visceral expression. Later that day, Christina discovered that Joan had gone into the meticulously maintained rose garden, a place Christina loved, and had taken a pair of shears and decapitated every single blooming rose, leaving a scene of senseless destruction. The message was unmistakable. There was only room for one star in the Crawford universe. Any attempt by Christina to shine on her own would be met with swift and brutal sabotage. This relentless campaign of physical and psychological warfare was designed to instill one core belief in Christina: that she was worthless without her mother, that she was an ungrateful orphan who owed Joan everything. Joan would shower her with extravagant gifts, ponies, designer clothes, lavish parties, only to capriciously take them away or hold them over her head as proof of her maternal generosity. Love and violence, reward and punishment were so terrifyingly enmeshed that Christina's childhood became a labyrinth of confusion and fear. She was living in a gilded cage, a princess in a horror story, and for 30 long years the world remained utterly oblivious. The intricate web of abuse Joan Crawford allegedly wove was not just about physical punishment. It was about total emotional and psychological domination. It was about isolating her children, ensuring their world revolved entirely around her unpredictable moods and demands. One of the most heartbreaking aspects of Christina's story is her systematic exile from any semblance of a normal childhood, accomplished by shipping her off to a series of boarding schools. These schools were not chosen for their academic excellence, but for their punitive and isolating environments. They were, in effect, elegant prisons. A particularly harrowing experience occurred at the Flint Ridge Sacred Heart Academy, a strict Catholic convent school. After being expelled from another school, an act Joan perceived as a public humiliation, Christina was sent to Flint Ridge. Upon her arrival, the Mother Superior delivered a chilling message directly from Joan. Christina was to be treated as a pariah. She was forbidden from receiving any mail, any phone calls, or any visitors. Imagine being a young teenager, already emotionally fragile, and being subjected to this level of calculated isolation. Christmas arrived, a time of joy and family for the other girls. They received packages and letters, their spirits buoyed by thoughts of home. Christina received nothing. The silence from her mother was deafening. Then, a few days after Christmas, a large crate arrived from the Brentwood mansion. For a fleeting moment, Christina felt a surge of hope. Was this a peace offering, a sign of forgiveness? She opened the crate with trembling hands. Inside there were no gifts. Instead, she found every single one of her belongings from her bedroom at home. Her clothes, her books, her childhood toys, even her report cards. Joan had packed up and sent her entire life away. The message was not just cruel, it was an act of profound psychological erasure. It said, "You have no home to return to, you no longer exist for me." It was, as Christina would later describe it, an attempt at a kind of soul murder. Yet, even in this profound darkness, the human spirit finds ways to endure. Christina's brother Christopher, adopted 2 years after her, became her silent ally. His own experiences were just as horrific. He was often tied to his bed at night to prevent him from getting up to go to the bathroom. He too endured the beatings and the psychological torment. Years later, his own corroboration of Christina's account would be a powerful, if tragic, validation. In the lonely corridors of that grand house, they were comrades in a secret war, their shared trauma forming a bond that no one else could understand. A knowing glance across the dinner table, a whispered word of comfort when Mommie Dearest was out of earshot. These were the small acts of rebellion that kept them sane. Decades later, after Mommie Dearest was published, a letter arrived that brought Christina a different kind of validation. It was from a woman named Mama Ceda, Joan's longtime housekeeper and cook. Mama Ceda, who had been fiercely loyal to Joan for years, finally broke her silence. She wrote to Christina to say that she had seen it all. She had witnessed the rages, she had seen the fear in the children's eyes, and she had remained silent out of fear of the powerful, vindictive woman who employed her. For Christina, this letter from a first-hand witness was a profound moment of confirmation. It was proof that her memories were not the distorted fantasies of a bitter daughter, but the lived reality of a terrified child. It was a whisper from the past, finally speaking the truth aloud. On May 10, 1977, Joan Crawford died of a heart attack in her New York apartment. She was, by most accounts, 70 years old. The world mourned the passing of a Hollywood giant. Tributes poured in, celebrating her grit, her glamour, and her legendary career. Her carefully constructed myth seemed secure, destined to be immortalized in film history. Then came the reading of her will. Joan had 4 adopted children, Christina, Christopher, and the younger twins, Kathy and Cindy. In her final testament, she made a statement that sent a shockwave through Hollywood. The will read, "It is my intention to make no provision herein for my son Christopher or my daughter Christina, for reasons which are well known to them." With that single vindictive sentence, she had fired one last shot from beyond the grave. This public disinheritance was the final catalyst for Christina. For a year and a half, she wrestled with her story, putting it all down on paper. In October 1978, the result, Mommie Dearest, was unleashed upon an unsuspecting public. The book was not just a bestseller, it was a cultural atomic bomb. It landed on the pristine coffee tables of America and exploded, shattering the carefully polished image of one of Hollywood's most enduring icons. The reaction was immediate and violently polarized. The book was all anyone could talk about. For millions of readers, it was a terrifying, mesmerizing look behind the curtain of celebrity. But for the Hollywood establishment, it was an act of high treason. Joan Crawford's friends, co-stars, and loyal fans rushed to defend her memory with a ferocity that was breathtaking. Her great rival, Bette Davis, famously remarked, "I was not Miss Crawford's biggest fan, but wisecracks to the contrary. I did and still do feel sorry for her. She was never a happy woman, but she was a professional, and she was a star, and she was a loving, caring mother." Myrna Loy, another contemporary, was more blunt, calling the book trash and Christina a dreadful girl. Van Johnson, Cesar Romero, Douglas Fairbanks Jr., a who's who of Hollywood royalty, lined up to denounce the book and assassinate Christina's character. They painted her as a greedy, unstable, and ungrateful opportunist, cashing in on her mother's death. They argued that Joan was simply a strict disciplinarian, a product of a different time when sparing the rod meant spoiling the child. The term they used was strict, not abusive. They dismissed the stories as wild exaggerations, the bitter revenge of a daughter who had been cut out of her mother's will. The controversy was dramatically intensified by Christina's 2 younger sisters, the twins, Kathy and Cindy. Adopted as infants in 1947, their experience of Joan Crawford was, by their own account, vastly different. After the book was published, they became its most vocal critics. In a flurry of interviews, they passionately defended their mother. Christina and Christopher were difficult, Kathy stated publicly. I'm sure they did things that were provoking. I'm not saying my mother was perfect, but I think the book is a great exaggeration. Cindy added, "To us, Mommy was a wonderful person." This familial schism was the perfect weapon for Christina's detractors. How could children living in the same house have such fundamentally different realities? It's a question that still fuels the debate. Historians and biographers suggest several plausible explanations. By the time the twins were growing up, Joan was older. Her career was in decline, and the frantic pressure to maintain her star status had eased. She had also married her fourth husband, Pepsi Cola executive Alfred Steele, and for a time seemed to find a degree of stability. It's also a common and tragic dynamic in abusive families for one or two children to be singled out as scapegoats, bearing the brunt of a parent's rage, while others are treated with relative kindness, becoming the good children. But the furious debate over the specific events in the Crawford household almost obscured the book's true, earth-shattering significance. In 1978, the concept of child abuse was still shrouded in shame and secrecy. It was considered a private family matter, something that happened elsewhere in poor, uneducated families. Mommie Dearest, for all the controversy, dragged this taboo kicking and screaming into the mainstream. Christina's story, coming from the heart of Hollywood glamour, made it impossible to ignore. It sparked a national conversation, giving countless silent survivors a voice and a sense of validation. The thousands of letters that poured in for Christina told the real story. They came from men and women from every walk of life, and they all said the same thing. Thank you. You told my story. This happened to me too. The historical debate may never be fully settled, but the book's cultural impact is undeniable. It started a revolution. The long-term consequences of Christina Crawford's decision to speak out were as massive and complex as her childhood trauma itself. The book's phenomenal success inevitably led to a movie. In 1981, Paramount Pictures released Mommie Dearest, produced by Frank Yablans and starring Faye Dunaway in a performance of ferocious, almost kabuki-like intensity. The film was a commercial success, but its legacy is deeply complicated. Dunaway's portrayal of Joan, while technically brilliant, veered into the territory of high camp. The film amplified the most sensational aspects of the book: the wire hangers, the scrubbing of the floors, the chopping down of the innocent tree, turning them into moments of grotesque, almost laughable theatricality. Audiences, unsure whether to be horrified or amused, often chose the latter. Mommie Dearest became a midnight movie phenomenon, with audiences shouting the lines back at the screen, brandishing their own wire hangers. For Christina, the film was a double-edged sword. It made her story globally famous, cementing it in the public consciousness forever. But it also, in many ways, trivialized her pain. The caricature of the crazed, eyebrow-penciled monster overshadowed the more insidious, nuanced reality of the psychological abuse she had endured. The film, in its cinematic extremity, made the story easier to dismiss for those who already wanted to disbelieve it. Christina herself has expressed deep ambivalence about the movie, acknowledging its power while lamenting its transformation of her life into a pop culture spectacle. But far away from the glitz and gore of Hollywood, the book was having a much more profound and positive impact. It served as a watershed moment for the burgeoning child abuse prevention movement. By putting a famous, beautiful face on both the abuser and the survivor, Christina shattered the myth that family violence was a problem of the lower classes. She demonstrated that it could fester anywhere, even behind the gates of the most glamorous estates. In the wake of the book's publication, reporting of child abuse and neglect saw a marked increase across the United States. It was as if a dam of silence had broken. Christina herself, finding her acting career effectively over, blacklisted by a town that prized loyalty above all else, channeled her energy into advocacy. She wasn't content to simply tell her story. She wanted to change the system. She accepted an appointment to serve as a commissioner for the Los Angeles Interagency Council on Child Abuse and Neglect and worked tirelessly to lobby for legal reforms to protect vulnerable children. She transformed her personal trauma into a public crusade. Then, in 1981, just as the movie version of her life was being released, fate dealt her another devastating blow. At the age of just 42, Christina suffered a massive, near-fatal stroke that left her partially paralyzed and unable to speak. Doctors gave her a grim prognosis, suggesting she would likely spend the rest of her life in a dependent state. It was a cruel irony. After finally finding her voice and using it to change the world, she had been physically silenced. But the same unyielding spirit that had enabled her to survive her mother's reign of terror now fueled her recovery. For 5 long, grueling years, she subjected herself to intensive physical and occupational therapy. Inch by inch, word by word, she fought her way back. She had to relearn how to walk, how to talk, how to write, how to do everything. It was an extraordinary act of will, a quiet, private battle that was perhaps even more heroic than her public one. Her survival, her refusal to be broken by her body any more than she had been by her mother, was the ultimate testament to her resilience. Her life is a profound and unsettling lesson in the vast chasm that can exist between public image and private reality. It reminds us that behind the carefully curated photographs and the glowing press releases, human beings live complex, messy, and often painful lives. Joan Crawford was not a one-dimensional monster. She was a deeply damaged woman, a product of her own traumatic childhood, who, in her desperate quest for control and adoration, inflicted her pain onto the next generation. This doesn't excuse her alleged actions, but it adds a layer of human tragedy to the horror. And that's all for today's video. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up, let us know your thoughts in the comments section, and subscribe so you won't miss out on future uploads. See you next time.